welcome everyone. My name is Lynn Shea. I'm a professor in the Liberal Studies Department, and I coordinate the academic speaker series here at Landmark. I'd like to just ask you to mute your phone if you have one, and also your laptop if you're taking notes. Thank you. So we're really excited about tonight and to introduce our two speakers. Sylvain Schmolsky, who's Dean of Liberal Studies, will share some thoughts about them.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Nice to see so many students here and faculty and staff. Good to see you. This presentation is called Resisting Nuclear Armament in the 21st Century. And I believe the two of you are going to show some clips and guide some discussion, talk about your work. Documentary filmmakers here today are Taylor Dunne and Eric Stewart. Taylor Dunne is an assistant professor in the Film Studies Department at Keene State College, a documentary filmmaker who's shown work in New York, San Francisco, Paris, Istanbul, British Columbia, and probably more places. Those are to name a few. And Eric Stewart is an assistant professor here at Landmark College of visual communication, art, and all things visual and technological and old school and new school. Eric Stewart's been really a wonderful addition to our faculty this year, working in the Communication and Professional Studies Department and working in the Art Department. And he's also shown his work internationally, but I want to say something else about Eric. I've known Eric for, I don't know, like 6 to 8 months, and this is one of the most resourceful, inventive people I've met in terms of knowing where rooms are, figuring out how to get things done in a bureaucracy that doesn't always make sense, knowing the people who care for buildings after hours, taking care of students, and generally having a lot of initiative and creativity here at Landmark. So it's been great working with you. We're really happy to have both of you here, and thanks everybody for coming.
And a lot of those skills are things that I've learned in working on this documentary. I always feel like people think I'm very chatty, and it's true. But very much our sort of technique for filmmaking is to show up in places and to start talking to people. Because we really believe that hearing from people in their own voice is how we get through some of the stickiest parts of our history and culture. And kind of before we get started, I want to, of course, thank you all for being here. It's amazing to see so many familiar faces. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some work that's very sort of personal to me. Before we get started, I think there's sort of 2 points that we wanted to be kind of definitive about, to offer you some definitions so that you can watch our work more accurately. We are both materialist filmmakers. It's not that we don't use computers or technology, but we're both very engaged in the act of working with 16mm, 35, and other forms of film. So our films are on film. We're going to be watching them digitally, but really just for convenience sake, as we show you some clips, but they exist on reels. And part of here's a reel. And so when we're sharing our work with you, it will be helpful to keep in mind that it's a material. It's something that we touch, something that we scratch, it's something that we manipulate physically, and that we're very interested in the things that we leave behind. So not only are we materialist filmmakers, but we're experimental filmmakers. And this sort of subtle distinction between mainstream film and experimental film will become clear as you watch our stuff. I was telling one of my colleagues, maybe a month ago or something, that I don't really make films with people in them, at least not sort of like living people, and I mostly make films about plants. And that's true. You'll see my films that are about plants. So experimental film are films that are not traditionally narrative. we like to leave a lot of the work up to the audience in terms of you, the audience, you are a co-creator in the production of the story. Right? You are equal participants in the narrative.
And we're going to do like a really, this is going to be kind of like a lightning fast round because Eric is going to just show you some clips and talk about his background and kind of how he got where he is as a filmmaker and artist. I'm going to do the same. And we don't really have enough time to like watch our films in full because we also want to talk about our collaborative project, which is this off-country project, for which the slide is up on the screen. So you're only going to see like bits and pieces of these to just kind of give you an idea of this aesthetic. But I think one thing that's important to note that with experimental film, sometimes, because it's like something that you're not used to seeing, it often doesn't follow like the norms of traditional narrative filmmaking, whether or not that's fictional narrative or documentary narrative. And a lot of times with experimental film, what's problematic about just watching a clip is sometimes the film itself teaches you how to watch it. So you're only seeing like a little flash here and there, and to have kind of the full experience, it is more nuanced. It's getting in that rhythm, and the film teaching you how to be a viewer a lot of times with these kinds of things. And then we brought, as Eric showed you, we brought some film and some loops. So maybe afterwards, if you want to come up, if you've never, looked at film, analog film before, you're welcome to come up. We also brought examples of the cameras that we use. This is a Bolex 16mm camera. You crank it up, there's no battery in there. It's like, it's made in Switzerland. It's like a nice Swiss watch.
You can hear it?
Yeah, it's just this very, like, I don't know, I love it. What was I gonna say about it? Most of our films, we use a Bolex to make them. Not all of them, but most of them. And today, and I also teach 16mm filmmaking at Keene, and today I was using this in class. I had that class today, so I just kind of came here from there. So it is kind of a living thing, and a lot of artists still use it, and so it's not like, I don't know, completely strange.
It's not anachronistic. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So we're going to try to do this lightning fast, and like, if you've ever had a class with Eric, you know this guy can talk. I'm going to try to keep him on track over here. Okay.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we've kind of divided this up. I'm going to talk a little bit for 15 minutes about my sort of journey as a creative professional. I'm going to do this by first telling you about a film I made in 2016. This film is called Wake. And I would sort of consider this my first mature film. I'd been engaged in filmmaking for about a decade at this point. I think I was 28 when I started on this film, and maybe 30 when I finished it. And the film uses a technique called photograms. And I'm very interested in what materials and how materials communicate themselves to us. So we're looking at a still from this film I made called Wake. And to make this film, I would sit in the dark, completely dark, right? It's a dark room. No red lights even, right? Because the film I was using is also sensitive to all wavelengths of light. So I would sit in the dark, and what I would do is I would take my father's ashes. He passed away in 2007, 2008? Oh, doesn't matter. Thank you, Nate. That's very thoughtful. So I would take my father's ashes, and I would lay out one frame of the film, and I would sprinkle my father's ashes on it. And then I would turn the light on, turn the light off. And then I would move the film one frame at a time. I would tap the surface of the table so that the ashes would settle. And then I would turn the light on, turn the light off. And then I would move the film one frame at a time, tap the table so the ashes would settle, and turn the light on and turn the light off. And this film is 6 minutes long. There's about like 6,000 frames of film in that length. So you can imagine me turning the light on turning the light off 6,000 different times. It's like, this is the basis of what we would call stop animation, right? And so that's like an interesting idea, right? Animating my father's ashes. So I oftentimes talk about sort of like the ontology, or like what film is in my classes. And film is really this process of fixing the ephemeral into a frame. So I'm gonna, before we watch it, this film begins with the audience reading. I'm not gonna ask you all to read, and I'll read this letter to you. I shouldn't have put it on screen because now you're all reading. But so I'll read it to you. The film begins with a letter that somebody wrote my father, and at the end of the letter, my father writes a letter to me. And it says, "As I assume you have noticed, loud, live rock and roll music has lately been heard all over the building and on the sidewalks outside, emanating from the front basement space of 528. I believe that live band sessions are an inappropriate use of any of our living or common areas and constitute a nuisance to all of us." And so the letter goes on. It's one thing to note that this film is silent, right? It begins with a letter about sound, and the film is silent. So at the end of this letter that the audience is asked to read, you see my father's handwriting, and he writes a note to me, gave this to me. And he says, "Eric, you came home after being born, and this loud, live rock and roll music was performed right below your crib. You slept through every rehearsal. It's in your bones." And so now we'll just watch a clip. And it's sort of striking to remember that the things we see being animated are in fact bones. And so I'll just play a little bit of this, and I'll probably talk over it. Oh, Mamma Mia. Oh, it did. Okay, sorry. Oh, I'm failing. Okay. So the film is in black and white. I develop it myself. I work on it in really, really short strips. And I sort of develop it in the darkroom right there. And it does have this sort of strobing effect. If that's bothersome, I should have warned you. Feel free to rest your eyes. You can close your eyes. And so it's silent, and we watch this, this is the whole film combined with that letter. And one of the things that's really important to me as an artist and a maker, like, I don't really make things for other people. And I know I'm here sort of telling you about the things that I make, but I'm really not interested in sharing my work with people. I'm often deeply uncomfortable doing it. And I made this film for me. And when my father died, he died in such a way that it was a surprise. And I didn't see his body after he died, and he was cremated. And it was a really, really strange experience I'm sure many of you have probably had a similar experience, to sort of interact with somebody who's alive, and then one day they're just gone. And there is something, this film is called Wake, right? It's like wakes are something that we do to provide closure to us. And when I started making this film, I'd had the idea for a long time. And the idea of this film absolutely terrified me. Sort of the thought of having to touch my father's ashes was disturbing. And I can tell you that when I started doing it, it didn't feel disturbing. It didn't feel weird. It felt intimate in a way that's really hard to explain. And the sort of physical process and really ritual of making this film changed my relationship to my grief. And that's sort of one of the things that I really take away from the process of making this film. So this is really the kinds of films that I make. are photograms. Oftentimes they're silent. Visual explorations of material. So I think I'll show one last clip and then we'll segue into Taylor. So I want to talk about sort of this bridge from aesthetic material experimentation to documentary investigation. So I made a film in 2019, doesn't matter, called Harbor, which is about plants. It's about the history of the terrarium, and it's dedicated to Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward, who in the 18th century invented the Wardian case. The Wardian case is a terrarium, and the Wardian case was used as a form of refrigeration, when refrigeration didn't exist, to take plant specimens from the United States all the way to Europe. And they would take, I was mostly interested in Douglas fir and redwood trees that were brought to Europe this way in the 17th century. So I, in my studio, built a Wardian case and started animating ferns using, this is just like an engine basically on a 16mm Bolex. And it'll take frames of film every minute, every 15 minutes, every 2 hours, etc. And so in my studio, I photograph ferns over like the course of a year. Kind of a crazy person, and I really like to recreate the things that I'm researching. So this is a film about redwoods growing in England and terrariums, and it's also not about any of those. So we're just going to watch these ferns blooming.
Excuse me?
Yeah, my friend.
Can I remember, why is this called Harbor again?
So I don't know that I told you why it's called Harbor, and I don't know that I have a really good reason for calling it that, except that I spell it the English way with a U, and harbors are these sort of ports of entry because I'm really interested in how botanical specimens are being traded around the world. So that's like one of the things that I really talk about with my students, is sometimes we don't have reasons for making aesthetic choices. And sometimes having reasons are bad ways to make aesthetic choices. And one of the most difficult aspects of teaching art is that you have to teach students to sort of like, I always feel like our intuition is like right here, sort of like feel your way to an answer. And so I don't have a good reason for calling it Harbor, except that it conjures things that are near what I'm trying to think about, which is plants in the ocean, Old English stuff. So Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward, Bagshaw Ward wrote, sort of like famous, he created terrariums to protect his fern specimens from the industrial pollution of London. film is really just to sort of be illustrative of kind of my shift in thinking and moving towards more documentary and nonfiction modes of making films. What do I want to do?
Photographs?
Good. Yeah. Yeah. What was that? That's 15. I can keep going. Because really these are the stop along the way towards talking about off-country.
Yeah. I know, and I'm gonna like breeze through mine. But we can, oh, I have to hit present. There. Right. Oh, this one? Yeah. So, we're moving on to me, but these are just some more skills from his film.
Why?
And maybe he'll come back and talk about
Maybe.
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 It's lightning fast. Okay, hi everybody. So I'm not going to introduce myself because that was already done. I think there's a lot of, Eric and I are our own unique artist filmmakers, right? We're coming from our own individual personal history, but I do feel like we share a lot of interests and aesthetics, and that there is definitely some crossover in our work, which I think is probably one of the reasons why, we've gotten to know each other and become great friends. I will just kind of give you a little bit of information about some of the films I've made since I really started filmmaking. I mean, I started working with analog film actually in high school, which is kind of rare, but I won't really get into details. It was just kind of like I took this unique class and I kind of got the bug. Like sometimes people who experiment with analog, they think, ugh, I'm never gonna use this, it's such a pain, blah, blah, blah. Then they end up getting intoxicated by it, and then it's then all my money is going towards filmmaking. And I tell my students, I'm I honestly feel sorry for you when you get this bug, but I'm also excited. So that happened to me. I can't talk about my films without talking about my great-grandmother, who I was very close with when I was a child. She grew up out west. She was a ranch woman in the Wild West. In fact, she was the first girl born in this town called Obar, which is now a ghost town. And so I loved just sitting as a young child, listening to all of these stories about ranch life and American Indians and cattle and the Dust Bowl and all these things. And I really think that's what got me hooked on storytelling. I didn't have any technology to record her, but I don't even have recordings of her voice or anything. But I wish I did. So I really believe that she's the one who started me on this path. So when I was an undergraduate, like many of you in this room, for my senior thesis project, I decided to make a film about Obar, where my grandmother grew up. I had never been out west before. I hadn't really even traveled very much at all. I had no money. I had a Super 8 camera. And I went on this wild adventure that looking back, I'm man, I'm lucky I really didn't get into some serious trouble. I was hitchhiking. I mean, I wasn't even old enough to rent a car. I honestly don't know how I did it, but now I would be way too scared to do something like that, but I did it. And so I filmed in New Mexico, in eastern New Mexico. I made this film. You can see this too online on Vimeo. This is readily available, shot on Super 8. And I interviewed some of my relatives that were still alive. My great-grandmother had passed away, but her sister was still alive, and so I interviewed her about the town and stayed with her at a nursing home. I can't believe they let me do that, but they did. Crazy girl, so I did it. And so that's kind of where I started. And I got really interested in oral history storytelling. And this also bridges into Eric and our work and off country. And oral history, you don't really go in with it's not a journalistic approach necessarily with questions and you're asking questions. You're just kind of letting someone talk. like letting them just tell stories, and it's a long process. But that's kind of my approach to nonfiction, is using oral history. So my work is personal. You know, OBAR is personal, about my great-grandma and my family. This is another personal film I made. I finished in 2012. This is a film that I think is you'll see there are similarities to Eric's film Wake. I made this film about not even a year after my mother had passed away. And I had been without any people in them. Also, like, and I'm also interested in home movies, other people's home movies, but I didn't have any home movies myself, which is true of a lot of people that get interested in these things as I'm learning. So my mom, I knew that she was dying. She didn't have very long to live, and I just was struck with like this deep, like, oh my gosh, I need to get her on film. I have like no film of her. Like how, you know, I need to get her on film. So I asked my mom, would you just please go down to your garden and I'm going to film you in the garden. My mom hated to be on film anyway. But it was kind of this like very urgent thing. Oh, it's, where is it? How did you get over there? There it is. So,
Play first.
okay, sure, I'll do that just in a second. So, with this film, a couple of things to say about it before we watch a clip. So, I urgently filmed her in her garden. And then about like, this was like in August, so it was like very green. I'm from upstate New York. It's kind of similar to here a little bit. And anyway, so I knew that she was dying, and so like I knew that like I was going to have this film to be able to look at her after she passed. So after she passed away, I got it processed, and then at that time I was researching, because this leads into the next film. I was researching this Penobscot woman and actress named Molly Spotted Elk. Has anyone heard of her before? Just curious. Molly Spotted Elk? Probably not. She was an actress in the silent era from Indian Island, Maine. Anyway, Molly Spotted Elk, in addition to being an actress, wanted to be a writer, and she was the first Abenaki to actually write the history of her people in a book, okay? So it had been all of these white anthropologists, like normal, you know, the huge, going and collecting stories, but she was collecting the stories from her people. So that was like a big deal, although the book wasn't published until after she died, and like no one has really heard of it before. But anyway, they're like beautiful stories. One of them is called The Corn and Tobacco Mother. And so it really resonated with me because it's a story about the first woman, or the first mother. And so, and it's about like giving your body over to like the earth so that like the earth can have like nutrients and like those seeds, and then you pass the seeds on. It's like so to kind of keep you alive. I feel like I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this. So I took some text from that, and I took like a sharp object, and I took a piece of film, and I sat there and I scratched the emulsion off the film of every frame and wrote the text in the film. So animating, working frame by frame. Eric was working frame by frame in the darkroom. I was working frame by frame at home, listening to Joan Baez with a bottle of wine and crying because this was like a deep, like, it was also like a period of mourning. Like, I felt like I was in grad school when my mom died. It was all crazy. And then I felt like I really had this time and focus to like really think about her and like put this into the film. And then I took the Super 8 film. It's like a smaller frame size than 16. And I used this machine called an optical printer, which then rephotographs frame by frame the Super 8 and blows it up to 16. So again, animating frame by frame. So a lot of time. And I'll just show you a clip of this. I'm gonna just come in here. It's only like 6 minutes. This is silent, but it'll give you it'll give you like an idea of what the text looks like when you hand scratch it into the film. Oh, sorry, you said that already. I'm sorry. Oh, never mind. Oop. Sorry. I slowed it down.
What was that?
I'm gonna pause it. So, I mean, it has this like very, like taking Super 8 and blowing it up to 16, you're like magnifying the grain in the film so it makes it even grainier and dirty and kind of like earthy. So, I know, and I'm like, how long have I been talking? But, yeah. Again, like Eric, I didn't make this film for anyone but myself and to remember my mother. So I think there's that similarity too. So then, jump ahead. I'm researching Molly's spotted elk because that is my really deep research project when I was in grad school. And I embark on creating this essay film. And I start to expand my practice, or some things while making this film are similar to other work I did. I'm interested in oral history, except this time I do research at UMaine in Orono, and I go to the Maine Folklife Center, and there is an interview between Molly Spotted Elk's mother and a anthropologist or a oral history historian. I use that interview, I get permission, I use it in my film. Oops, it's like, I keep doing this, sorry. I'm supposed to be really good with technology. I use that. I start researching like amateur film at Northeast Historic Film, this amateur film archive in Maine, because I'm kind of interested in using amateur film in my practice. And then I'm like looking at, because Molly Spotted Elk has been gone for, since the 70s, I think. I just have little fragments of her in in the films and her letters and things, and so I'm kind of incorporating that into this essay film about her and about the landscape and about storytelling. And then just very quickly, my practice, I think of like using these things as a way to get to like real stories about people and local history. Non-hierarchical source material, so kind of like, I don't know, like, not like using film, like amateur film is like film that just someone would film at home of their family, right? So it's like it's like film for them. It's like in the way that I make film and that Eric makes film, not film for anyone else. So incorporating that into my nonfiction practice. I don't even know if I really have time to show a clip of the talk, do I? Like 2 minutes?
Maybe we should, yeah, if you want to do
2 minutes, and then I will just like, I know I put way too much stuff together.
There's just so much we wanted to share
I
with you all.
I'll just show you a real quick clip so you can see what it looks like.
Oh, hit escape.
Hit escape.
Yeah. Pop over that. I know, I use
Where
Bing
is it?
for whatever stupid reason.
Okay, sorry. It's okay. I'm just going to show you one little smidge of this. You-
And you'll see she uses a lot of time lapse as well.
Oh, right. Come on, let me go ahead.
This is Joan Brooks. Today is August 11th, 1977, and I'm on my way to interview Jean Moore on Indian Island, Maine, about her mother, Molly Spotted Elk, her life, and her writings.
Her name was Mary Nelson and then Mary Ashambo, but she went by the stage name of Molly Spotted Elk.
When was she born?
November 17th, 1903.
1903. And did she live here all her life?
No, no way.
Okay, why don't you just give me a brief rundown of her life?
All right, she started dancing, of course, first here on the reservation in the little shows that they have. She had talent, she was noticed. She started going out dancing around in Maine. Then she went a little further afield into New England, different places. And she was still going to school. She would spend part of the summer or special occasions doing this. Then she got into show business later. She worked with carnivals. She has worked with, I think there was a show person by the name of Texas Guinan. She worked with her. She attended Swarthmore College, lived with Frank G. Speck and his wife.
Okay. Ask you about
Yeah, well,
that.
she had helped him when he was up here working on his book, Penobscot Man, and he offered to have her go and live with them while she went to college. She then transferred from Swarthmore to the University of Pennsylvania, and why she didn't finish there, I don't know. She never did get a degree.
What did she look like?
She was under 5 feet tall and weighed, about 96 pounds.
Okay, so it's also again a little problematic to show like clips because ultimately this film is like critiquing the foreign male voice. It's critiquing like the way that American Indians were like represented in film. So just to see this clip, you might be like, that does not look like traditional Penobscot, right? Like that is the American Indian stereotype. And I think the core of this film too is like this complicated world that Molly Spotted Elk was in, where she was always performing or having to perform this stereotype, whether it was in a pageant on Indian Island or in a Hollywood film. But she deeply wanted to be a writer, and she really wanted to get like a true story of her people through this writing. So it's this sad story. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Getting better at this. I don't know. Okay, so we're gonna like plow ahead, like skip through. I also make sculptural films. not just like black box films.
So one of the things I was really thinking about while looking at, or just while we were watching that clip, is the way that the audio had this real sort of like texture of like the reel-to-reel recorder. And the film images we're seeing have this real texture. And I don't know why, but this sort of like thought appeared in my head, that time is like a pencil that marks all of these surfaces. And our work as sort of documentarians is to create collages of the textures of history. So that when we talk about being experimental filmmakers, that's what we're talking about. That the frame is a place, the frame on the screen, is a place for us not to compose words and sentences and like thoughts that you articulate with words, but really this sort of site where we can collage the textures of history, and then it's up to you, the audience, to figure out what those textures mean. So we're giving you a lot of power. And the way that ties into this film that we're making about nuclear weapons is that we're trying to critique the legacy of nuclear weapons, which has historically fixated on technological innovation at the expense of people's stories. So I jumped ahead quite a bit.
That's fine. We skipped over the like kind of community building and DIY filmmaking. We teach workshops, and I do want to mention though that part of our practice together, which is what we were going to use to lead into this, is like the way that we exhibit our films. We're really interested in showing our work at micro cinemas and galleries. And these stills, because I do think it is interesting for people to see. Eric and I went on tour, was in, think of like a band, right? In a van, except with films.
And we don't have a van.
We don't have a van. But we went on tour in Europe, and I think we hit 11 countries, and just real like rapid, like couple of months just like showing a film and then teaching a workshop to help pay for the trip. And then like someone would host us, and it was really awesome. And this like, it's hard to look at, especially without just awful earthquake that just happened. But this is in Istanbul, really DIY backyard of like a restaurant, and then this amazing like dark room that we had to bring in water buckets, poster from that. And then in Berlin, like doing these handmade filmmaking workshops. Okay, but I think that is interesting. So if anyone, maybe we'll get to do some around here, especially now that COVID is kind of like waning.
But it also, sorry to interrupt, it also sort of like ties into like the process of how we went about the production of this film that we're working on, is that we really just toured the Southwest doing photography and giving talks about nuclear politics in the 21st century. So now that you have a really firm understanding of like what our identities are and like why we make the aesthetic choices that we make, I feel like we're adequately prepared to talk about Off Country, which is a film that we've been making forever, and the pandemic and having a child certainly has thrown a wrench in that plan, and not really in a bad way.
We're just too exhausted now.
And so we were, like really right before the pandemic, we were pretty on track to finishing this film in 2020. We just had some minor B-roll to shoot in, we had some B-roll to shoot and really had to sort of shift our plans, and now we're looking at a premiere of next year. But we got started by looking at Rocky Flats, which is, like, this is actually insane to think about. So Rocky Flats is an industrial, was an industrial plant outside of Boulder, Colorado, from about 1950 to 1992. The United States produced, I don't know, I'm gonna guess, is probably a pretty good guess, about 6,000 nuclear weapons, probably more, right? This is what we admit to having in our inventory today, is in the thousands. Inside of every nuclear weapon is a pit of plutonium, and all of those pits were produced at Rocky Flats. Rocky Flats had a terrible track record environmentally. The EPA did not exist until 1972 by law and didn't go into effect until 1974, and most military sites are exempt from the EPA. So one of the ways in which they got rid of plutonium waste is by letting it evaporate and leaving it in a field.
At Rocky Flats.
At Rocky Flats. So we really got inspired by grassroots activists who worked in the 80s and early 90s to have Rocky Flats shut down. And we started by interviewing these older activists, and just as a way to sort of collect their stories. And then we allowed that to sort of expand into other locations in the Southwest. The Trinity test site in New Mexico, which is where they had the first nuclear explosion in the world. And then also the Nevada test site.
I just want to backtrack 1 second back to Rocky Flats, because we went to CU Boulder for grad school. So we were like driving by. I had never heard of Rocky Flats before. It's actually a really beautiful area, and there's this housing development there called Candelas, which is like homes starting at like 600,000 or some crazy thing. And it's like, you know, how you would picture like suburbia. Well, it's built like on Rocky Flats. And my mind, when I found out about Rocky Flats, I was like, wait, what? Like you're gonna spend $500,000 on a house that's on the site of this? Anyway, my brain, I'm also kind of interested in like suburban horror genre of film. So for me, I was like, whoa, like this is insane. So that's kind of like where I think we were both just like, what? But anyway, so then we started researching Trinity test site, going down to New Mexico, and began talking with downwinders. So people who were are likely having health effects from the Trinity test from 1945.
And we're going to show a clip, and you're going to hear three voices. One is this older gentleman who was alive when they had the Trinity test in 1940. I want to say five, but
it's 1945. July.
Yeah, 1945. And then this woman is talking about how when that first bomb went off, there was about 20 pounds of plutonium. We're able to sort of like do some fancy math by looking at the size of the explosion and seeing that not all 20 pounds of that plutonium exploded. About 13 pounds of it were just spread across the Southwest.
And it rained like right down.
Yeah. And this is like an enormous area that goes all the way into Mexico. And anyways, and so the U.S. chose New Mexico on purpose to have to be the site of nuclear weapons testing because
for the Trinity test.
For the Trinity test and for the Manhattan Project, because there was this overwhelming cultural sense that nobody lived in the Southwest and nobody is code for predominantly Anglo-Northeastern Americans. And the Southwest is full and was full of indigenous people and Hispanic communities who had been living there for centuries and who were predominantly exposed to radiation during this event and had no idea.
Yeah, and they were ranchers and farmers, and it was July, so people were harvesting things and canning, and it was like potentially dusted, and also getting into rainwater, and they're still they're still fighting to get recognition. And the thing about radiation is it doesn't just affect like one generation, it affects generation after generation because it changes your mitochondrial DNA. Like you're passing this stuff along. So it's like generations of trauma from, from this radiation.
And so some of the people in our film are in this frame on the right. Paul Pino is a main character in our film, and his family owns land about 12 miles as the crow flies from the Trinity test site where they set off the first nuclear weapon.
It's like 30 miles, but still it's very close.
And,
Where is that?
It's in Carrizozo, New Mexico.
And so he was really kind enough to
Carrizozo.
open up his home to us and to share his story with us.
Yep, and the clip we're showing though is the trailer, right?
Yep.
We're showing you the trailer and he's not in it, but stay tuned and soon we'll be able to show you the whole feature.
And this is a trailer that we put out for the premiere that was supposed to be in 19/20. Hope to premiere it next year. And it does have Spanish subtitles because that is how we're finishing the film.
So when they detonated the bomb down there, he said it lit up brighter than any daylight he ever saw. He thought it was the end of the world.
You can't see it, we'll just have to hold. Okay. Next.
All right, well, we're at the Trinity site today on one of the 2 days a year that it's open to the public. This is the site of the very first detonation of a nuclear weapon on Earth, which is both special and horrifying when you think about it. And I'm big on history, and especially nuclear history. It's a very interesting part of the 20th century. And so I've been out here a couple times before. Every couple of years I try to get here. I came here from Tucson today. So this little concentration here, so you can hear a little more activity. And when they cleaned this up, all they did was they bulldozed it. So it just made it smaller and put it under the sand. So every time it rains, a little more comes to the surface. Most of it's green, but there's stuff that's black. Anything that the bomb was made of actually was up in the cloud and rained back down.
The bomb was a plutonium-based bomb, and it was a very inefficient bomb, and they packed it with about 13 pounds of plutonium, and only 3 pounds of it detonated, fissioned. The rest of it went up into that radioactive cloud, and the isotope of plutonium that we're dealing with has like a 24,000-year half-life. So the government has never been able to account for what happened to that 10 pounds of unfissioned plutonium. You know, where is it? How did it get deposited? And you just need one small particle of that to settle in your body, and it gives off radiation for the rest of your life. And in 1945, in July, women would have been harvesting fruit and vegetables and canning them, drying them, right, for the winter. There are lots of access points where people were exposed, and the government never gave anybody a warning before or after.
Sting 2019. I swear we are gonna finish it.
We are.
Just like
Our daughter's gonna be co-producer. And so we're looking at the Trinity test site, and also the Nevada test site, which was home to hundreds of above-ground nuclear weapons tests and thousands of below-ground weapons tests, all the way up until the late 80s. And the film also interviews quite a few people who are involved at the Nevada test site. So maybe just kind of to close it all out, sort of like we use oral history as a way to sort of talk about people's history, to think about alternatives to nuclear weapons technology outside of a history of innovation and progress. So by foregrounding people's lived experience, it's all about sort of like supplementing that Oppenheimer, nuclear weapons, better living through science. And so that's really, again, why we take these aesthetic approaches we do take, because there's a larger agenda that we have about the mainstream discourse. So it's probably a good time to open it up to questions.
I do want to say though, just one quick thing about because you saw that trailer and there were archival documents, maps, oral history, landscape, but then there's also things in the built environment. So an important part of this film is looking at museums, looking at roadside attractions. Trinity Site is a tourist attraction. It's open twice a year. You can go in this crazy convoy out there. And so kind of like looking at those sites as well in our film. So like there was that dinosaur, there's like stuff like that all over the Southwest. Like there's the world's largest chili pepper is in our film. So like things like that. It's just like bizarre. But yeah, does anyone have any questions? I know that was like a lot of information we try to pack in. You can see where our wormy minds are coming from.
Oh my God, so many questions. Yeah, my friend.
I'm curious how you talked about doing like micro showings of your previous films. How do you plan on presenting off country?
Similarly, yeah, we had a whole sort of like itinerary lined up, mostly with small activist groups. There's a lot of, the veterans community has always been really important to the anti-nuclear movement. And so there's a lot of sort of groups like that, or local peace initiatives in a lot of towns that we have a lot of connections to. And so we'll probably do some streaming and some theatrical release, but predominantly we do want to share it and facilitate conversations by visiting activist groups.
Yeah, we want to do a big tour like we did before, but in the U.S.
Yes.
So like we have presented at the Peace and Justice Center in Boulder, and they were definitely a big part of our project. So stop there, and other peace and justice centers throughout the country is the plan.
Cool. And then, did you have a question? And then
I just want to remember, like, how did you say they were getting rid of that the radioactive waste there?
So it's called. Basically, they have these irrigation sprinklers, and plutonium's a metal, so you have to use oil and a couple of other things. It's just like milling any other metal. And they just spread the oil in this field, and they just let it sit there. Even in the 80s, that was the plan for.
But they also took a lot of the topsoil, and they brought it to Idaho.
Yeah.
So you can't like get rid of this stuff, okay? So that was one of the things they did. And now, like Rocky Flats is not so much a part, like we're really focusing on the Nevada test site and the Trinity test site in our film, and we're doing a separate project about Rocky Flats right now. But Rocky Flats, it's also problematic because like where these housing developments are, like there are a lot of prairie dogs, which I really like.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like them. I think they're very cute and awesome. But they dig down and they're like tossing dirt up and stuff. So it's just like a constant problem.
Yeah. So Naila had a question, and then Nate.
I just wanted to ask, and sorry if you said this already, when did you guys decide to start this film, or like whose idea was it? And also, I'm not sure if you said this, why specifically this topic, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I've always been really kind of obsessed with the history of the Manhattan Project and nuclear weapons. Like the first sustained chain reaction was at the University of Chicago, and I grew up in Chicago. Like I'd always just been really interested in that. And they left a lot of, it was called CP1, Chicago Pile 1. I don't know where Chicago Pile 2 is. But they just like left it in a prairie somewhere, kind of like outside of the city. And that had always been fascinating me. And then kind of being in Boulder, being so close to this location, Rocky Flats, I think was just like, it just grabbed us, because it's like.
Yeah, it's also just like really messed up. It's like, I also want to like finish this because it's very depressing, and you're just like, it's this huge problem, and then you start thinking about like nuclear war, and you're just like, oh, like, and all of this. But I think secondly, I also have always been interested in nuclear stuff as well, and when I lived in this area, before I went to grad school, I participated in marching to the Capitol against Vermont Yankee, so I was doing that. So it was kind of on my mind. And
there was this activist, Leroy Moore, who he started the Boulder Peace Center. And he had like a hunger strike in front of City Hall, and someone just connected us with him, and we really found his story inspiring, because those stories of like activism really kind of help when this sort of subject matter is so dark and it's so easy, especially in the age that we live in now, and I'm sure we're all anxious about all kinds of stuff that we don't have control over. By really focusing on learning about the histories of activists gives me a lot of comfort.
Totally, absolutely. And one person who's a really big part of our film took part in these backcountry actions to stop nuclear testing in Nevada, and it is crazy. I mean, it is like insane. Like, she would march with like a bunch of people, and they would go out and try to stop the test and like almost get blown up.
Yeah,
so I feel like that's just like awesome. So anyway.
Yeah, like, can you imagine what it takes to be the person who's like, oh, I think we're gonna research where the secret ground zero is for a secret weapons test, and then we're gonna hike through the backcountry for a week to get there, when they're gonna detonate it, and we're gonna wave at the cameras and hope that they stop to make a point. Like, that's really inspiring. Cool. So Nate, what was your question?
All right. I was gonna ask, where on earth is the test site in Nevada?
It's north of Vegas.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So you put like Vegas right here?
So Nevada's a triangle, Vegas is at the bottom, and then you've got the border with Utah. It goes all the way out here towards like Truckee and Reno, and so that makes a triangle that we call the Nevada test site, and it's probably the size of New England. And in the 60s, it was very common for tourists to watch nuclear explosions in the Nevada test site from
Vegas. They would have like special like platforms on the top of hotels and have like nuclear themed cocktails, and then like watch the. It's just like crazy.
Bizarre. It's really bizarre.
But it happened.
Yeah, that's how you would locate it, Nate. It's just north of Vegas.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, thank you for that. Oh, and my friend.
I know we're short on time, but a technical question. The photography or filming of the nuclear tests themselves, did they have to invent any new technology? And if they did, did we make any discoveries that we use today?
Yeah, I'm not a big expert on that, but I do know, because obviously film is sensitive to the entire ultraviolet spectrum, including X-rays. So they did have to innovate shielding for the magazines, shielding for the cameras, shielding in the glass. I have a feeling they probably, in the lenses, they probably put some kind of a metal. I don't know if you could, I think you can get lead in glass, but they probably did treat the lenses that way.
Would the film and the reel have to be protected before it was fed into the machine?
Well, if you think about it, like, if you're in a magazine, you could build this out of lead, you could shield it. They oftentimes would put earth around it. They would dig trenches, and then, I mean, you're pretty contained in a camera, so I would imagine if you could get something in the glass, that this is a pretty self-contained unit. But you can also...
we saw some of the cameras. They actually have it. There's a lot of nuclear-related museums, like the Bradbury Museum in Los Alamos, and on display they have some of the kind of cameras that are like lead, basically. I think covering it and like really heavy.
Yeah, so they did, and that's a good place to check is the History Museum at Los Alamos Labs. It's dedicated to really this innovation narrative, and it's very much about technology.
And it's gone now, but when we started this film in Los Alamos, there was this place called Black Hole, which was like the surplus place of old technology from Los Alamos. So it's kind of like the best equipment ever, but like old. And you could go there and like buy stuff, and it was really awesome, but then it closed. And we filmed a little bit there. And I think you got a projector that started on fire.
I did.
Yeah.
That's true. Anything else, or should we call it quits? I mean, we kind of ran the gamut there.
If you're